The new Z28 DOHC V6 engine with a 60-degree cylinder angle is manufactured entirely in aluminium. Two overhead camshafts control the 4 valves per cylinder via roller cam followers with hydraulic valve lifters. The intake side has continuously adjustable camshafts. The camshafts are driven by the crankshaft via 3 timing chains. To provide high torque over a wide range of speeds, the engine has a turbocharger with a double-flow turbine housing. The air supply is regulated via an electronic throttle valve. The combination of the controllable valve overlap, produced by the variable camshaft adjustment, and the air control via the turbocharger makes it possible to dispense with an external exhaust gas recirculation system. The engine management system, Trionic ME 9.6 from Bosch, is available in 2 different software variations. The Z28 NEL possesses 169 kilowatts or 230 horsepower and 330 newton meters. The Z28 NET possesses 188 kilowatts or 255 horsepower and 350 newton meters. The engine is fitted in the Vectra C and the Signum. To remove the timing case cover of the Z28, disconnect the battery. Disconnect the wiring harness plug for the mass airflow meter. Detach the intake pipe for the secondary air system. And remove the air cleaner housing with air intake pipe. Remove the upper engine cover. Disconnect the wiring harness plug for the air pressure sensor. Unclip the line for the power steering. And detach the charge air pipe. Remove the coolant return line. At the engine control unit, disconnect the wiring harness plug for the body wiring harness and the engine wiring harness. Detach the earth connection. To remove the engine wiring harness bracket, disconnect the wiring harness plug for the atmospheric pressure sensor. Unscrew the nuts. Disconnect the wiring harness plug for the intake pipe sensor and set the wiring trough aside. Unclip the wiring harness plug for the intake pipe pressure sensor. Unscrew the screws and remove the bracket for the engine wiring harness. Detach the vacuum line from the upper part of the intake manifold. Unscrew the bolt and detach the bracket with the crankcase vent lines. Detach the wiring harness bracket for the injectors. Remove the 6 bolts for the upper part of the intake manifold. Lift off the upper part of the intake manifold and disconnect the throttle valve module wiring harness. Lift off the gaskets for the upper part of the intake manifold. Remove the tank vent valve with lines. Relieve the fuel pressure with KMJ 34730-91 and disconnect the fuel supply line. Unscrew the bolt from the power steering reservoir. Remove the return hose, seal it, and set aside the power steering reservoir. From the cylinder head of cylinders 135, disconnect the wiring harness plug for the camshaft sensor, disconnect the camshaft adjustment valve, and unclip the bracket. Disconnect the wiring harness plug for the fuel pressure sensor, and from the cylinder head of cylinders 246, disconnect the camshaft sensor wiring harness plug and the camshaft adjustment valve and unclip the bracket. Remove the ignition modules from both cylinder banks. Disconnect the wiring harness plugs for the injectors. Unscrew the 3 fastening bolts for the fuel distributor pipe and remove the fuel distributor pipe with injectors. Unscrew the 2 bolts. And remove the lower part of the intake manifold. Seal the intake ducts. Release the engine control unit earth cable from the wiring harness. Remove the battery and the battery support. At the turbocharger, disconnect the wiring harness for the solenoid valve bypass. Disconnect the charge pressure control solenoid valve and release the wiring harness. Remove 1 nut and 3 bolts and take out the turbocharger heat shield. Unscrew the bolt and remove the crankcase vent line. At the secondary air system non-return valve, cylinders 246, remove the 2 bolts from below. Open the quick release fitting and remove the secondary air system non-return valve. Remove the bolt for the secondary air system delivery line. At the top, on the secondary air system distributor pipe, and underneath on the secondary air pump, unclip and remove the secondary air system delivery line. Slacken the lower bolt for the turbocharger control unit and remove the upper bolt. Detach the ventilation line. Unscrew 3 screws and remove the secondary air system line for cylinders 2, 4, 6. Detach the engine transport shackle. Disconnect the earth cable from the cylinder head. Remove the heat protection and disconnect the wiring harness plug for the coolant temperature sensor. Unclip the wiring harness and set aside. Unscrew the 13 screws and remove the cylinder head cover for cylinders 2, 4, 6. Detach the non-return valve for venting the crankcase from the cylinder head cover cylinders 1, 3, 5. Set aside the wiring trough and wiring harness. Unscrew the 13 screws and take off the cylinder head cover for cylinders 1, 3, 5. Drain the coolant and, from underneath, unclip the hydraulic line for the power steering from the front axle body. Attach the frame KM6313 to the front axle body. Fit the adapter KM6313-200 and turn the spindle in the oil pan bore until there's no play. Release the tension on the ribbed V-belt and remove from the torsional vibration damper. Using KM6330 in conjunction with KM956-1, counter-hold and release the bolt of the torsional vibration damper. With special tool KM6331-1, remove the torsional vibration damper. Release the lower bolt of the engine damping block support. Unscrew the lower 10 screws of the timing case cover. Unscrew the lower bolt of the starter wiring harness bracket from the timing case cover. From above, detach the coolant line from the coolant discharge port. Remove the 5 bolts and 1 nut and take off the right-hand engine damping block. Detach the bolt for the power steering line bracket. Remove the engine damping block support and remove the ribbed V-belt. Detach the wiring harness bracket. To remove the coolant discharge port, pull off the coolant hose, remove the 2 screws and take out the coolant discharge port. Counterhold using the special tool EN46104 to release the bolts for the coolant pump belt pulley ready for removal. Remove the 6 bolts. Place a collecting pan underneath and remove the coolant pump. Unscrew the retaining bolt for the engine damping block support. Slacken the upper bolt for the power steering pump. Remove the lower bolt. And push the power steering pump forwards. Now, the 3 bolts are accessible to enable the ribbed V-belt tensioner to be removed. Unscrew the bolt on both sides. And remove the camshaft adjustment valve. Remove the 10 upper screws of the timing case cover. Release the timing case cover and remove it. After cleaning the sealing surfaces, screw in the 2 centering bolts EN46109-2. Apply sealing compound to the cover and insert the timing case cover. To ensure the sealing bead remains undamaged, it's essential to use the centering bolts. Screw in the upper screws of the timing case cover and remove the centering bolts. Then screw in the lower screws of the timing case cover. From above, on both sides, install the camshaft adjustment.